The Study, describing a way to manipulate a lab animal's brain circuitry accurately enough to turn behaviors both on and off.
FEMA have already put out zombie commercials and con-ops on that, correct?
That's correct.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've called this special meeting of the Zombie Hazard Command because we have vital new information and new problems to discuss.
We'll now vote for approval of H.R. 8791, the Homeland Terrorism Preparedness Bill. Said bill requests emergency response funding up to and including this section is classified. Dollars to prepare for a national level terrorist attack and or attack from classified. Funding for first responder personnel and vehicles would be doubled if said attack leads to more than 80% of national population being affected by classified. This funding shall commence in conjunction with the first attack on classified, or the first large-scale outbreak of classified, dependent upon which comes first. Civilian and military units shall be trained in containment and combat of classified, including irradiated classified, with possibility of classified airborne, classified flesh-eating, classified, and or all of the above in such event as classified spewing, classified escape, are released or otherwise become uncontrollable. Air Force units may also be directed to combat said classified due to their enormous size and otherworldly strength. Should event occur in urban areas, that's classified, far surpassing our darkest nightmares. Should casualties exceed, classified body disposal actions shall be halted and associated resources shall be reallocated to classified underground, classified protected birthing centers. A new Bill of Rights shall be drafted and approved by classified. Having now reviewed the bill, I ask you to please cast your votes.
The problem with that is you look through that con plan, it's all about 5 different types of zombies. There isn't anything in there about opposition forces. There isn't anything about winning political battles or counterinsurgencies. It is only about a zombie apocalypse, defending it. And you will see that every NIMS compliant, practically, agency, or whether that's state, local, or federal, has already had their zombie apocalypse preparedness training. They've already done their practice. The CDC has had a zombie apocalypse preparedness website up for the last 5 years. Now they've reduced it to a PDF cartoon. Even in the Amazon Web Services contract, the force majeure clause, I believe it's Article 41, states that we're not liable for damages in case there's a zombie apocalypse. This is coming, folks, and the serious adverse event report Pfizer put out post-marketing, they had put out as part of a FOIA. The number one serious adverse event was the 1p36 gene deletion. You look up the symptomology for that, it is the elimination of the frontal cortex and a propensity to bite. What's very odd about this is this was the symptom post-vaccination. That disease is a congenital disease. It means you're born with it. So how is it then possible that this is the number one serious adverse event from the Pfizer shots? It's here, folks. And then you got Dr. Chambers here to tell you I'm not just a raving lunatic.
All right, take your seats, everyone. We need to get this meeting started. Before we begin, we'll make sure that everybody has picked up their copy of the briefing minutes. There are more details. I'm going to give you the outline. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I've called this special meeting of the Zombie Hazard Command because we have vital new information and new problems to discuss. Get through some security. Bear with me a moment. All right, first, a little housekeeping. National Security Order 21Z, it passed. Our operational authority is supreme. Use it. Now back to the topic at hand. As you know, we've been battling a unique biological threat and we've made little progress. Lack of any live specimens. If a body's found at all, it's already permanently dead. Now, we finally have a live specimen. But before you get too excited, let me stress that it's only one. We need more. Here's where it gets interesting. We now have research notes from a top U.S. scientist who is intimately familiar with a zombie infection. He studied both the pre- and post-mortem zombie condition before PD. He has identified and named the virus, Cryptonecrophagia vulgaris, CNV. It's a retrovirus, and there's no cure. This scientist's notes indicate prions may also be involved in the infectious process. However, at this point it remains unclear what, if any, role they play. Remember the single life subject I mentioned earlier? Unfortunately, the subject and scientist are one and the same. We do not know how much time he has left before he's no longer of any use, except perhaps for dissection. So we need more live specimens. Keep that in mind during operations. Mode of transmission, currently unknown. Transmission modes ruled out: bites, scratches, casual contact, vector infection, droplet, or airborne spread. Some Z team members can attest to the fact that bites and scratches don't spread infection, at least not yet. To date, 12 team members have been wounded while engaged in field operations. They've undergone mandatory 90-day quarantine. None have showed any signs of infection. Not all team members are out of quarantine yet, but we hope they'll be released and return to active duty soon. Emerging public awareness of the situation. I'm going to mention each of these points, then talk about them in greater detail. There are things you need to know. First, the Coconut Grove fly-in. Many of you were there. Then there's the Miami incident. Some of you were there. The CDC Zombie Apocalypse Preparedness Release. DHS released a fake zombie preparedness story. Then there's the recent purchases of large quantities of ammunition. About the Coconut Grove fly-in, Z Teams 1, 2, and 3 cleaned down a zombie cell. That got a lot of public attention. Our cover story was that this was an urban assault exercise in preparation for the upcoming UN meeting. For now, our cover story is holding, but one got away. That led to the Miami incident. That should never have happened. About the Miami incident. Some of you were there. Our cover story was bath salts. That was blown when the autopsy results were leaked. There were no bath salts present. We're still dealing with the fallout, and we're investigating the leak. The CDC Zombie Apocalypse Preparedness Release, it was sent out against our wishes. Then they changed their story. This brought even more attention to it than if they'd just left it alone. Next, DHS released a fake zombie preparedness story, also against our wishes, but it's out there, so we're going to use it as our cover story. Next month, DHS is running a 1,000-person training exercise in San Diego. Z Teams 2, 4, and 5 will be doing a cleanup operation in another part of the city at the same time. This gives us plausible deniability. I shouldn't have to stress how important this is. Make certain none of them get away. We don't want another Miami incident. About the ammo purchases. We've used news and various media outlets to float the idea that unprecedented large ammo purchases are for government agencies to defend against civil unrest in anticipation of economic collapse. Those of you in this room know all too well that this is a much nicer bedtime story than the truth. Reality is much less pleasant. Right now, the cover story is working. Weakening of current cover stories. Bath salts. In Florida, bath salts was a go-to drug of choice. The autopsy leak created problems for this story. Other drugs, synthetic marijuana and S21, were floating these in Louisiana, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. Crazy people were floating this idea in Louisiana, New York, and Chicago. Animal attacks were floating this story in Georgia, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. We estimate 2 years of viability for these cover stories. Public distribution of full disclosure of current operations. Some brainiac has lined up all the recent events and past history like beads on a string. We don't know where he's getting his information, but too much of the actual facts of our operation are woven into the story. It's not coincidence. He's getting his information somewhere. The story is Dr. Eve's Zombie Killer. It's presented as a fictional novel. LabyrinthOfArts.com is an independent website where the book can be found. For those of you who are wondering, we currently have no plans to shut down this website. We need to gather further intelligence, find out what their sources of information are, and plug whatever leaks we find. Right now, John Q. Public does not know what's happening. We'd like to keep it that way. If you have any questions, I'll address them in my office after the meeting. You now have the facts as we understand them. This briefing is adjourned. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good day.
We know that upon the broadcast from the 5G system that is now employed across the United States and the world for that matter, when they broadcast an 18 gigahertz signal for 1 minute 3 different times as a pulse, it will cause those lipid nanoparticles to swell and release these pathogenic contents, thereby causing a Marburg epidemic that they've already spent the money on. It's already done, right? The Marburg epidemic, for purposes of the law, has happened, and now we just need the actual disaster to happen. And there's actually worse parts to it than that, including the 1p36 gene deletion that effectively will turn those poor people into zombies. As odd as that sounds, our government's preparing for that.
Given the insanity that we are seeing in the general public these days about the willingness to throw away their rights, whether it be the right to bear arms, the right of free speech, the right to assembly, or the freedom to due process, it makes one wonder what the hell is going on. How did people get like this? How are people seemingly arguing against their self-interest and feeling no compunction about it? I'm going to take you on a tour of what is really happening behind the curtains in the world, all of which are being portrayed as necessary actions for the greater good of humanity. In 2013, former President Barack Obama was announcing his administration's brain research through advancing innovative neurotechnologies. The study, describing a way to manipulate a lab animal's brain circuitry accurately enough to turn behaviors both on and off. The point of the remote control mouse is not to create an army of robo-rodents, but to perfect a technique that will control the behavior by activating and deactivating neurons. The technique used to control neurons is called DREADS, designer receptors exclusively activated by designer drugs. Because the receptor does not respond to other molecules, including natural ones in the brain, the only way to activate the neurons is via the human-made ones. DREADS allow scientists to manipulate neurons without implanting anything in the brain. Look at this. Current optogenetic experiments rely on extracting opsins, light-sensitive proteins, from plants which can be introduced to mammals by methods including injection and infection via adenovirus. What they do is they genetically engineer a receptor that can get into a person through a viral vector, and what that means is through an injection of the vaccine or through the contraction of an adenovirus which has been modified. You might think, oh well, I just won't get injected, and I won't go anywhere where I can get this adenovirus. Adenovirus. There's 52 of them. And they range from the common cold, fever, sore throat, pink eye. They're prevalent. So that's creepy, because if you look at what it says, DREADS allows scientists to manipulate neurons without implanting anything in the brain. It indeed makes one wonder, given what we see today in the general public. You do need to take the designer drug, though, to make this effective. Once delivered into an organism, opsins can be expressed in eye, brain, or skin cells, allowing their light sensitivity to be remotely activated or silenced with timed pulses of light in different color wavelengths across the light spectrum that can target multiple bodily systems and cause a variety of biological effects. If targeted precisely enough with the appropriate light, it's thought that optogenetics could be used by manipulating neural circuits involved with pain, fear, reward, wakefulness, and social behaviors.
There's this enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked. And the BRAIN Initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action and better understand how we think and how we learn and how we remember. And that's part of what this BRAIN Initiative is about.
If scientists can turn on or off specific targeted groups of neurons at will, they place themselves in between the natural human experience and basically their keyboard. They place themselves between you and your natural human reactions to things. So, optogenetics looks like the way to go. But how do you get people to put wires in their heads? Well, you can't. But it turns out now you don't have to. Here we have the new development in optogenetics. Luminopsins, luminescent opsins, or LMOs, were developed to achieve combined chemo and optogenetic manipulation. Luminopsins allow manipulation of neuronal activity over a range of spatial and temporal scale in the same experimental animal. What they are saying here is not only can they turn on specific reactions, but they can also turn off those same reactions. A problem they were having with the other methods is they could only do one. They could either stimulate the receptor or suppress the receptor. With the combined chemo-optogenetic manipulation, they can do both. They're using luminopsins, so they don't need the wiring anymore. Basically, science can use these luminopsins to interfere with a person's free will. The other function of optogenetics is just a simple observation. They might want to know how you feel about seeing a particular image, how that image changes the next thing you do. Basically, the scientists can understand what exactly is going on in our bodies and our minds, but to do that, it can't be invasive. Well, what have you noticed proliferating on the market for the last 8 years? Microsoft Band. It'll record all the stuff going on in your body. Same with Google Fit or Apple Watch. This Muse head-brain sensing headband is even scarier. There's also 23andMe, which collects your genetic data. Imagine if they had a combination of all these things. All of this is attached to your smartphone. So it's not so much the device, it's the smartphone monitoring that's the dangerous part. Because who's getting that data? And what are they doing with it? Look at what it says here. This is from 2016. Towards a psychophysics of interoceptive processes, the measurement of heartbeat detection. Over the past 50 years, research on interoception has grown exponentially from 17 citations of Interocept in 1965 to 8,440 in 2015, Web of Science. The early Russian work was summarized in Rosman's landmark article on the subject and demonstrated, inter alia, that interception participated fully in the intersensory processes of Pavlovian conditioning. They want to know all of our interoceptive data because it plays directly into Pavlovian conditioning. You can change anybody's behavior if you know how to manipulate those feelings inside them when they are experiencing something. You do that over and over and over, and you actually change their whole physiological responses to it. Have you ever wondered if we are going towards that future? A world that is entirely sending feedback regularly to some processor somewhere? Is there a prison around us of electronic biofeedback and manipulation? Let's say there will be a flu virus, all the common adenoviruses, and they had this modified dread receptor in there. We would never know, and it would be in there, in our body, just waiting to be activated by the designer drug or by light activation. Maybe it sounds paranoid, or maybe not. You've been served with the opportunity to decide what to believe.